The dust is everywhere. Thick clouds kicked up by spinning tires and loose sand, turning the air into a brown haze that stings the eyes and chokes the throat. Through it comes a sound, not the isolated crack of rifle fire, but the sustained, heavy rhythm of machine guns. Vehicle-mounted PKMs hammering out rounds in long, overlapping bursts designed to shred metal and flesh. The convoy is breaking apart. 3 American trucks, 5 Nigerian vehicles. Scattering across flat scrubland where the only cover is a distant tree line already occupied by the enemy. Radio voices strain through the static, calling positions, calling for anyone who can hear. Someone is separated from their vehicle. Someone is running. The mortars begin, dull, earth-shaking impacts that send geysers of sand and rock into the air with each heavy thump. This is Tongo, Niger. October 4th, 2017. 11:40 a.m. local time. 12 American Green Berets and their Nigerian partners are fighting for survival against an enemy force that outnumbers them as much as 10 to 1. They've been awake for more than 24 hours. They're riding in unarmored pickup trucks, and the nearest air support is in another country. This wasn't supposed to be combat, and what happened next will expose how America fights wars most citizens don't even know exist until the casualties come home. And it became one of America's deadliest hidden wars. When the news broke in mid-October 2017 that 4 U.S. soldiers had been killed in Niger, the response from the American public wasn't just shock, it was confusion. Niger? Where is Niger? Why are we in Niger? And the question that cut deepest, why did we know we were fighting there? The official narrative had always been clean and contained. U.S. forces in West Africa were there to train local partners, advise them, assist them in their fight against regional terrorist groups. The mission was described as non-combat, support roles, capacity building, the kind of deployment that doesn't make headlines because, officially, American troops aren't supposed to be in direct firefights. But here's what the public didn't know. At the time of the Tongo ambush, the United States had between 800 and 1,000 troops deployed across Niger. Most Americans, and a significant number of members of Congress, had no idea these forces were conducting what the military calls accompany missions in active combat zones. This wasn't Afghanistan. It wasn't Iraq. It wasn't Syria. This was what military planners call a partner force operation, Americans working alongside local troops to hunt high-value targets, gather intelligence, and disrupt terrorist networks. It was quiet. It was deniable. And until 4 flag-draped caskets came home, it was invisible. The shock wasn't just that Americans had died. It was that Americans had been fighting a war most of the country didn't know existed. The term train, advise, and assist had been used as a shield, a bureaucratic phrase that obscured the reality of what these missions actually involved. Training happens in classrooms and on ranges. What was happening in Niger was operational deployment in hostile territory against a lethal enemy force. If you want to understand the wars America fights that the public is never briefed on, subscribe now, because this story is just the beginning of a pattern that extends across multiple continents and involves thousands of troops operating in the shadows of public awareness. To understand what went wrong at Tongo, you have to understand how the mission changed, not once, but multiple times, in the span of less than 24 hours. Each shift took the team further from their original orders and deeper into a situation they weren't resourced or positioned to handle. It started simple. On the morning of October 3rd, 2017, at 0600 hours, a team designated ODA 3212, Operational Detachment Alpha, part of the 3rd Special Forces Group, departed their forward operating base in Wallam, Niger. The original mission was routine, a civil-military reconnaissance patrol to the village of Tyloa, meet with local leaders, gather atmospherics, show presence, build rapport. The kind of low-risk operation these teams had been running for months without incident. By late morning, the team had reached Tyloa. They found no enemy activity, no intelligence of value, no indication of ISIS presence. The mission, for all practical purposes, was complete. They prepared to return to base. Standard procedure, clean extraction. But then, late that afternoon, the mission shifted. Intelligence placed a high-value target, down to Chafo, a sub-commander within ISIS in the Greater Sahara, near the border with Mali. This was actionable intelligence, time-sensitive, the kind that doesn't wait for ideal conditions or optimal force packages. ODA 3212 was redirected to support a separate operation, a helicopter-borne raid intended to capture or kill Chafo. The team altered course. They moved toward the objective area, prepared to provide ground support for the inbound helicopters. This was already a significant departure from the original mission, from civil engagement to direct action support. But it was still within the parameters of what Special Forces teams are trained and equipped to do, assuming the full mission package was in place. Then, as nightfall approached, the weather deteriorated. The helicopter mission was canceled. Here's where the mission crosses a critical threshold. Instead of returning to base, ODA 3212 received new orders. Proceed to the objective, designated Objective North. Alone. No helicopter support. No quick reaction force on standby. Just a team and their Nigerian partners, moving toward a suspected enemy position near a hostile international border. This was no longer a support mission. This was a unilateral reconnaissance operation in denied territory. The mission had evolved from civil engagement to combat support to independent direct action, all within the span of hours, all while the team was operating continuously without rest. By the early hours of October 4th, 0600, the team reached Objective North, a suspected enemy campsite near the Mali border. They found it recently abandoned. A few structures, some equipment, a motorcycle, which they destroyed to deny its use to the enemy. They photographed what they found, collected what intelligence they could, and prepared to extract. At 0830, after more than 24 hours of continuous operations, the team began the long drive back to base. This is mission creep in its purest form. Each individual shift might have seemed reasonable in isolation. Redirect to support a high-value target operation. Proceed when helicopters can't fly. Gather intelligence from an abandoned site. But cumulatively, these changes had taken a team that started on a low-risk civil patrol and placed them deep in hostile territory, exhausted, without dedicated air support, in vehicles never designed for sustained combat. The compounding effects matter. Fatigue degrades decision-making. Operating alone eliminates backup options. Moving through unfamiliar territory increases vulnerability. And when you string together mission after mission without returning to base, without resetting, without allowing for proper planning and resource allocation, you create conditions where a single point of failure can cascade into catastrophe. The team was isolated. They were tired, and they were about to drive through one of the most dangerous corridors in West Africa with nothing overhead to protect them. The trap wasn't set yet, but all the pieces were moving into position. Let's establish exactly what the team was working with, and more importantly, what they weren't. The terrain in this part of Niger is unforgiving in its exposure. Flat, arid scrubland stretching for kilometers in every direction. Sparse vegetation. Mostly thorny acacia trees scattered across sandy ground that offers almost no natural cover. When you're moving through this environment, you're visible from a long distance. There are no hills to use for screening, no dense forest to break line of sight, just open ground and the occasional cluster of trees. The roads aren't paved. They're dirt tracks worn into the sand by years of use. And when vehicles move across them at any kind of speed, they kick up thick clouds of dust that hang in the air like smoke. This dust does more than obscure vision. It announces your presence from kilometers away. Anyone watching knows you're coming long before you arrive. The convoy itself was a mix of American and Nigerian vehicles. 3 U.S. trucks, white and tan Toyota Land Cruisers, the kind of unarmored commercial vehicles you'd see driving through any developing country. 5 Nigerian vehicles, similarly light. Some are what the military calls technicals, pickup trucks with heavy machine guns mounted in the bed, functional for firepower, but offering zero protection to the crew. None of these vehicles were MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. None of them had armor plating, no ballistic glass, no reinforced floors to deflect explosives. These were soft-skinned vehicles, chosen specifically because they blended in with civilian traffic and didn't present the heavy military footprint that armored vehicles create. The calculation was clear. In a low-risk environment, the benefit of looking non-threatening outweighs the protection that armor provides. But that calculation only holds if the environment actually is low risk, and if the mission profile doesn't change. The team had been awake and operational for over 24 hours. That's not an incidental detail. That's a critical vulnerability. Sustained operations without sleep don't just make you tired. They degrade cognitive function, slow reaction times, and impair the kind of rapid decision-making that can mean the difference between life and death in a contact situation. Studies on military performance under fatigue show measurable declines in threat recognition, tactical judgment, and situational awareness after just 18 hours of continuous operations. These men weren't walking around in a daze. They were trained professionals who could push through exhaustion when necessary. But biology doesn't care about training. The edge they needed to recognize an ambush forming, to react instantly to contact, to make the right tactical call under pressure. That edge was already dull before they ever reached Tongo. Communications were another vulnerability. The team was using handheld radios that struggled with distance back to their operating base in Wallam. They had satellite communications as a backup, but SATCOM isn't instantaneous. There's a delay, there's protocol, and in the chaos of a firefight, when you need to transmit your grid location, your situation, and your immediate needs, every second of delay compounds a problem. The team was operating in what military planners call a communication shadow, far enough from base that standard radio was unreliable, but without the robust satellite infrastructure that would give them immediate, clear communication with command and support assets. At 10:30 in the morning, roughly 2 hours into the return journey, the convoy pulled into the village of Tongo. The team leader conducted what's called a key leader engagement, a KLE. This is standard practice in civil military operations. You stop, you meet with village elders. You show respect for local authority. You gather information about enemy activity in the area. You demonstrate that American forces are there to help, not to occupy. On paper, this makes perfect sense. Building relationships with local populations is a core component of counterinsurgency doctrine. Villages can provide intelligence. They can warn you about enemy movements. They can create a buffer between you and hostile forces. But the timing here was unusual. The team had already been out for over a day. They were low on water. They were hours from base. And they stopped anyway, for over an hour. Later, after the investigation, analysts would conclude that this delay was likely intentional, that the elders of Tongo were stalling, giving time for ISIS-GS fighters to move into position. The official report lists this as highly likely, but stops short of definitive proof. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. The ambush happened minutes after the convoy departed. The enemy was already in position in ideal terrain, and the force size suggests this wasn't a chance encounter. It was a planned engagement. But in the moment, sitting in that village, the team had no way to know they were being set up. They followed protocol. They were polite. They engaged with the elders. And the clock kept ticking. The village of Tongo sits on the edge of a known ISIS-GS operating area. The terrain around it provides natural concealment for anyone willing to wait. Clusters of trees, slight depressions in the ground, enough variation to hide vehicles and fighters from a convoy moving on the main track. And there are only so many routes out of the village. The convoy's direction of travel was predictable. At 11:35, the convoy departed Tongo, 8 vehicles moving in a loose column. Dust already beginning to rise behind them. The track ahead was open, flat, exposed. The tree line to their flank was roughly 200 meters away, close enough for accurate fire, far enough that it wouldn't seem like an immediate threat. The morning had been quiet, routine, the kind of slow, hot morning where the biggest concern is staying hydrated and making it back to base before the heat becomes unbearable. 5 minutes later, the tree line erupted. 11:40 a.m. local time. The convoy is roughly 5 minutes south of Tongo village, moving at moderate speed on the dirt track that leads back toward Wallam. Then the world detonates. The initial contact comes from multiple firing positions simultaneously. A classic L-shaped ambush designed to catch the convoy in a kill zone with interlocking field of fire. This isn't harassing fire. This isn't a probe. This is sustained, coordinated violence designed to destroy. The weapons tell the story. Small arms, AK pattern rifles firing in controlled bursts and full automatic. But the real threat comes from the heavy machine guns. PKMs, likely vehicle mounted, putting out sustained fire at cyclic rate. The sound is distinctive, not the sharp crack of rifles, but a deep, rhythmic hammering that doesn't stop. These weapons are designed to suppress and kill at ranges beyond what infantry rifles can effectively engage. Then the mortars start falling. Indirect fire is a different kind of threat. You don't see it coming. You hear the launch, a distant thump, and then you have seconds to react before the round impacts. The explosions aren't precise, but they don't need to be. Mortars are area weapons. They suppress movement. They force you to stay low, stay still, which makes you an easier target for the machine guns that are already firing. The enemy force is estimated at 50 to 100 ISIS-GS militants against 12 Americans and their Nigerian partners. That's numerical superiority of somewhere between 4 to 1 and 8 to 1. More importantly, the enemy has the initiative. They chose the ground. They chose the time. They're firing from covered positions while the convoy is caught in the open. The convoy immediately begins to break apart. This isn't panic. This is tactical necessity. Staying bunched together in a linear column makes you a concentrated target. Every burst of fire that misses one vehicle has a chance of hitting another. The convoy splits into 3 separate elements. Try to maneuver. Try to find cover that barely exists. Try and create enough separation that the enemy has to divide their fire. And here's where the vehicle vulnerability becomes critical. During the key leader engagement in Tongo, the team had not been wearing their body armor. It was a low-risk village meeting. Full kit in that heat is exhausting, and the assessment was that the threat level didn't warrant it. Now, under fire, they have to stop and put on. Think about what that means. You're taking incoming fire from multiple directions. Rounds are impacting around your vehicle. Mortars are falling, and you have to dismount, pull your body armor out of the truck, put it on while exposed, and then get back into the fight. Every second you're doing this, you're not returning fire. You're not moving to cover. You're static, vulnerable, and the enemy knows it. The dust is overwhelming. Every vehicle that moves kicks up thick clouds that mix with the smoke from the mortars and the haze of heat rising from the sand. Visibility drops to meters. You can hear the impacts. You can hear the enemy fire. But you can't always see where it's coming from. Target identification becomes a split-second judgment call made through a wall of particulate that obscures everything. Radio traffic is intense but fragmented. The 3 elements are calling their positions to each other, trying to coordinate, trying to establish some kind of defensive perimeter. But they're spread out across hundreds of meters of open ground, separated by terrain and dust, and the overwhelming volume of incoming fire. And for 53 minutes, no one calls for help. This is the detail that will dominate every investigation, every after-action review, every congressional hearing. 53 minutes from first contact to the troops in contact, call that triggers the emergency response system. 53 minutes before air support is requested. 53 minutes before higher command even knows the team is in a fight for survival. Why? The official explanation is straightforward. The team initially believed they could handle the threat. Green Berets are trained to operate independently, to solve problems without immediate external support. They're the tip of the spear precisely because they can function in environments where help isn't coming. The initial assessment was that this was a firefight they could win or break contact from using organic firepower and maneuver. That assessment wasn't unreasonable in the first minutes of contact. Special Forces teams have successfully fought through ambushes before. They train for this. They drill on immediate action drills, on breaking contact, on using superior skill and firepower to overcome numerical disadvantage. But this ambush doesn't break. The enemy doesn't withdraw after the initial contact. They don't probe and fade like insurgents often do when they encounter resistance. They sustain fire. They maneuver to maintain contact. They keep the pressure on. As the minutes stretch into tens of minutes, the tactical reality becomes undeniable. The enemy force is larger than anticipated. They're better positioned. They're not breaking contact. and the team is running low on options. The decision to call for troops and contact support isn't made lightly. It's an acknowledgement that the situation has exceeded the team's organic capability to resolve. It commits higher-level assets. It escalates the engagement. And for a team trained to be self-sufficient, it's an admission that they need help. At 12:33 p.m., nearly an hour into the fight, the TIC call finally goes out. By this point, the convoy has been fully separated. One element has managed to find limited cover near a cluster of trees. Another is attempting to maneuver to flank the enemy positions. The third is pinned down, taking sustained fire, burning through ammunition. And somewhere in the chaos, Staff Sergeant Law David Johnson has become separated from his vehicle. What exactly happened to Johnson is one of the most painful and disputed aspects of this entire incident. For days after the ambush, his status was unclear. The initial reports listed him as missing, then as wounded and captured. The uncertainty was agonizing for his family and for the team members who survived. The official DoD investigation eventually concluded that Johnson was unable to reach his vehicle under sustained fire. In the chaos of the ambush, with dust limiting visibility, with multiple enemy positions firing simultaneously, with the convoy breaking into separate elements, he became physically separated from his truck. Rather than being captured immediately, Johnson evaded. He moved on foot, attempting to break contact, covering nearly a mile of open terrain while under fire. Eventually, he was pinned down in an area with no cover and no support, unable to maneuver, unable to be reached by the rest of the team. The investigation provides these facts but leaves many questions unanswered. The exact sequence of how he became separated, whether he was dismounted providing cover fire, whether his vehicle was disabled, whether he was attempting to reach wounded teammates, remains unclear. What is known is that he fought alone, in the open, against an enemy force that had him isolated. The rest of the team is fighting their own desperate battle. Ammunition management becomes critical. You can't sustain cyclic rate of fire for an hour. You'll burn through every magazine you're carrying. Fire discipline matters. Control bursts. Aim shots when you have targets. Suppressive fire when you don't. But always conserving. Always calculating how much you have left versus how long this might last. The enemy adjusts. They're not static. They maneuver to maintain contact, to probe for weaknesses in the American defensive positions. When one element tries to flank, the enemy shifts fire to suppress it. When another tries to consolidate, mortars walk toward their position. This is the grinding reality of a sustained firefight. It's not cinematic. There's no dramatic music. It's noise and confusion, and split-second decisions made with incomplete information while rounds impact around you. It's checking your ammunition count and realizing you're down to 3 magazines. It's trying to get eyes on your teammates and seeing nothing but dust. It's keying your radio and hoping someone, somewhere, is hearing you and sending help. The heat is brutal. Niger in October. Midday sun. Full kit and body armor. Exertion and adrenaline. Dehydration becomes a factor. Your mouth goes dry. Your hands shake. But you can't stop to drink because stopping means you're not in the fight. And somewhere miles away, the emergency response system is finally beginning to turn. At 1:10 p.m., 2 French Mirage 2000 fighter jets arrive overhead. For the team on the ground, this should be the moment everything changes. Fast movers. Air support. The kind of overwhelming firepower that can turn an ambush into a rout in seconds. The psychological impact alone of having jets overhead is enormous. It tells you that you're not alone, that the system is responding, that help has arrived. But there's an immediate problem. The enemy fighters are too close. Danger close. In military terminology, danger close means friendly forces are within the minimum safe distance for ordnance employment. For the weapon systems on a Mirage 2000, bombs, rockets, cannon fire, that distance is measured in hundreds of meters. Dropping ordnance when friendlies are inside, that radius means you risk killing your own people. And at Tongo, the fighting is happening at rifle range. In some areas, American and Nigerian forces are separated from ISIS GS positions by tens of meters, not hundreds. The three elements of the convoy are spread across the battlefield in positions that aren't clearly marked. There's no front line. There's no safe access for a gun run. The entire engagement area is a confused, intermixed close combat that makes precision air strikes impossible. The Mirage pilots cannot drop bombs. They cannot employ rockets. They cannot strafe with cannon fire. So they do the only thing they can: shows of force. A show of force is exactly what it sounds like. The jets make low-level passes over the battlefield. Fast, loud, unmistakably lethal. The message is clear. We can see you, we can kill you, and if you don't break contact, we will find a way to do exactly that. It's psychological warfare delivered at 600 miles per hour. The sound of a jet engine at low altitude is overwhelming, a physical pressure that you feel in your chest. For fighters who have been operating with impunity, who thought they had isolated and trapped this convoy, the arrival of air assets fundamentally changes the tactical equation. The shows of force work. Gradually, the enemy fire begins to slacken. Not immediately. This isn't a Hollywood moment where everyone drops their weapons and runs. But the sustained, coordinated fire that had been pinning the American elements down starts to decrease in volume and intensity. The militants begin to pull back. They disengage from their forward positions. They begin to withdraw toward the tree lines and the covered terrain they use for their initial assault. This is a tactical withdrawal, not a rout. They've accomplished their objective. They've inflicted casualties. They've made their point. They've demonstrated that American forces in this region are vulnerable. And now, with jets overhead and the risk of additional air assets arriving, the cost of staying the fight has become too high. For the team on the ground, the decrease in incoming fire creates opportunities. They can consolidate. They can check on wounded. They can start accounting for everyone and figuring out who's where and what the status is. But the relief is tempered by a grim realization. They've been fighting for over an hour and a half. They've taken casualties. And one of their own is still missing. The French Mirage jets remain overhead, running combat air patrol patterns to ensure the enemy doesn't re-engage. They can't fix the problem with bombs, but their presence alone is enough to keep the militants at a distance. By late afternoon, French Super Puma helicopters arrive to conduct the evacuation. These are large, capable aircraft, military helicopters designed to operate in hostile environments. They land under the protective cover of the Mirages, and the wounded are loaded aboard. The team consolidates their equipment. They prepare for extraction, but the extraction is incomplete. Staff Sergeant Law David Johnson is still out there, somewhere in kilometers of terrain around Tongo. His status is unknown. Whether he's wounded, evading, captured, or killed, no one knows. The helicopters lift off with the survivors. The Mirages continue their patrol, and a massive search operation begins to locate Johnson. It will take 2 days. Here's what the response reveals about the broader system failure. At the time of the ambush, ODA 3212 had no dedicated air support overhead, no armed drones on station, no close air support prepositioned in theater, no immediate reaction force specifically tasked to support them. The nearest available air assets were French jets based in Mali. The response time from the TIC call to aircraft overhead was roughly 37 minutes, and that's actually impressive given the distance involved. The French pilots launched immediately and flew at maximum speed to reach the battlefield. But 37 minutes is an eternity when you're in a firefight. It's hundreds of rounds expended. It's dozens of decisions made under fire. It's the difference between being able to maneuver and being pinned in place. The American military prides itself on providing overwhelming support to troops in contact. The entire apparatus, from satellite communications to global logistics to air supremacy, is designed to ensure that any American unit in a fight can call for help and get it fast. But that system depends on having assets in position, on having infrastructure in place, on having the command and control architecture to route requests and launch responses. In Niger, in 2017, that architecture was thin. The mission was supposed to be low risk. The threat assessment didn't justify the expense and complexity of maintaining dedicated air coverage for every patrol. The calculus was that these teams could operate with acceptable risk using local support and on-call assets from regional bases. That calculus was wrong. The system responded as fast as it could once the TIC call was made, but the 37-minute gap, and more importantly, the 53-minute delay before the call was even made, created a window where the team was entirely on their own against a superior enemy force. 4 Americans died in that window. The Department of Defense investigation into the Tongo ambush runs thousands of pages. It includes tactical analysis, leadership assessments, procedural reviews, and recommendations for changes across the entire theater of operations. But beneath all the military terminology and bureaucratic language, the investigation reveals a fundamental disconnect between what the mission was supposed to be and what it actually became. Let's start with the paperwork. The mission that led to Tongo was officially categorized as advise and assist. That designation matters because different mission types require different levels of approval, different resource allocation, and different risk assessments. An advise and assist mission is low risk by definition. It's training. It's mentorship. It's American forces working alongside partner forces in a support capacity, not conducting unilateral operations in hostile territory. But according to the official DoD investigation, the mission paperwork was inaccurately characterized. That's bureaucratic language for falsification. The document submitted to higher command described a routine patrol when the actual mission had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous, a unilateral intelligence gathering operation targeting a high-value individual near a contested border. The investigation places responsibility for this mischaracterization on junior officers. The implication is that team-level leadership submitted paperwork that didn't accurately reflect the mission profile in order to get approval for an operation that might not have been authorized if described accurately. But this raises uncomfortable questions that the investigation doesn't fully resolve. Was this a case of junior officers going rogue, making unauthorized decisions to pursue a mission outside their mandate? Or was this reflective of a broader culture, an environment where pushing the envelope was encouraged, where getting results mattered more than strict adherence to procedural requirements, where the unspoken expectation was that teams would find ways to say yes to mission requests even when those missions exceeded their authorized parameters? Some family members of the soldiers killed at Tongo dispute the narrative that this was simply a junior officer failure. They point to a systemic pattern across special operations in Africa, a culture where mission creep was normalized, where teams regularly operated beyond their stated role, where the gap between official mission descriptions and actual operations had become standard practice. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Junior officers made decisions that contributed to the disaster. But those decisions were made within a system that created incentives for aggressive operations and disincentives for saying no to mission requests. Now, let's talk about the legal authorities that put American forces in Niger in the first place, and how those authorities create the conditions for exactly this kind of mission drift. The primary legal justification for U.S. military operations in Niger is the 2001 Authorization for Use of Military Force, the AUMF. This was passed by Congress in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, giving the president authority to use military force against those responsible for the attacks and their affiliates. In 2001, that meant Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. But over the following 16 years, the interpretation of affiliates expanded dramatically. By 2017, the AUMF was being used to justify operations against ISIS franchises across multiple continents, including ISIS in the Greater Sahara, the group responsible for the Tongo ambush. Here's the problem. ISIS-GS didn't exist in 2001. They have no direct connection to the September 11th attacks. Their organizational ties to core ISIS are tenuous at best. But because they pledged allegiance to the ISIS brand and because they engage in terrorism, they're considered an affiliate under the AUMF's ever-expanding interpretation. This matters because it means the United States can conduct military operations against them without additional congressional authorization, without declaring war, and without the level of public debate and scrutiny that would come with conventional military deployment. The second authority is 10 U.S.C. Section 127E. This is a budgetary provision, a funding mechanism that allows the Department of Defense to support foreign surrogate forces in counterterrorism operations. It's deliberately quiet. It doesn't require the same congressional notifications as larger programs. It's designed to be flexible, responsive, and low visibility. What 12070 enables is exactly the kind of operation that was happening in Niger, American Special Operations Forces working with local partners, providing training and support, but also conducting operations that blur the line between advising and direct action. These authorities are broad, they're flexible, and they create a legal framework where the United States can be conducting sustained combat operations where Americans are regularly in firefights, where they're taking casualties, where they're engaged in active warfare, without most of the American public being aware it's happening. This is what people mean when they talk about the quiet war or the secret war. It's not that the operations are classified, though many details are. It's that they happen beneath the threshold of public consciousness. The deployments are small enough that they don't make news. The casualties are infrequent enough that they can be treated as isolated incidents rather than evidence of sustained combat. And the legal authorities are broad enough that no additional approval or oversight is required. The mission at Tongo was supposed to be advise and assist. Low risk, non-combat. But the reality on the ground was that American forces were conducting unilateral operations in hostile territory against a capable enemy force. The gap between the official description and the actual risk is where the disaster happened. Could more accurate mission paperwork have prevented the ambush? Maybe not, but it might have triggered additional scrutiny. It might have resulted in better resource allocation. It might have led to questions about whether this team had the support structure necessary for the operations they were actually conducting. The system failed at multiple levels. The mission planning failed to account for the cumulative risk of multiple redirections. The approval process failed to catch the gap between paperwork and reality. The support infrastructure failed to provide adequate backup for a team operating in a high-threat environment. And 4 Americans paid the price. In the days and weeks after the Tongo ambush, the families of Staff Sergeant Brian Black, Sergeant First Class Jeremiah Johnson, Staff Sergeant Dustin Wright, and Sergeant Law David Johnson demanded answers. They wanted to know why their sons and husbands were in Niger. They wanted to know what mission they were conducting. They wanted to know why it took so long to call for help. They wanted to know why Law David Johnson's body wasn't recovered for 2 days. Congress held hearings. The media ran investigative pieces. For a brief window, the war in Niger became visible. The Department of Defense conducted its investigation and released a summary of findings. Recommendations were made. Procedures were adjusted. Training was modified. And then, as these things inevitably do, the story faded from the headlines. Other crises emerged. Other scandals demanded attention. The news cycle moved on, but the war in Niger didn't end. U.S. forces are still there, still training, still advising, still conducting operations in partnership with local forces in regions where contact with ISIS-GS and other militant groups remains a constant threat. The mission continues under the same legal authorities, with the same fundamental structure, operating in the same shadows of public awareness. This is a reality of American military operations in the 21st century. We fight wars the public barely sees. We deploy forces to countries most Americans can't locate on a map. We conduct operations under legal authorities written for a different conflict 2 decades ago, but stretch to cover engagements across multiple continents against enemies that didn't exist when those authorities were drafted.